Hello, the world. Welcome back to this Humanitarian Love live session with Pauline. Hi, Pauline.
Hi, Asel.
So, the topic that Pauline suggested that we talk about, which I think is maybe one of the reasons why we're not getting to the person that we want, is because we are using the tool of dating in the way that's not useful, in the way that's against ourselves. And when I say tool, dating as a tool, maybe for some people it will sound offensive, or I don't know. If that's the case, use whatever they else, whatever. What I mean basically is how we might be using the dating as a means. How are we using it, right, to get to the result, which is finding love? And what are the ways that you could watch out for where it's not useful? So let's dive into it. Pauline, what are the ways that we might be using against ourselves?
Well, I think the main way we could be using dating against ourselves without knowing it is when we are not aware of a number of things, when we are not aware of basically our lens or our blueprints or the way we see relationship, meaning everything that has to do with our pattern relationship. And underneath the way our actions and our behavior, what are our thoughts and beliefs about ourselves, about the people we're dating, about love, about commitment, about intimacy. So the whole package of how we act in relationship, how we see the world of relationship, what we believe, like all of this, if we don't have awareness about our lens, about our model of operating in relationship, this can really turn against us.
hmm
Yeah.
So maybe it would be good to give some examples, and I will try to do that. And Pauline, you feel free to do that as well. So one of the ways that you could notice it that this is happening where you might be using dating against yourself is when you're acting in the way that's not getting you to the results, right? So, for instance, so you could be noticing it by your behaviors, by the way that you are saying things, by the way you are going on the date, by the way you are thinking about the dates. Like one of the patterns that I used to have is that I'm not deserving handsome guys. I don't know where it came, but anyway, this was obviously showing up in the way that I was then showing up in the dates, right? So, for instance, I would go on a date with this very handsome person, and then I would be the whole time thinking, is he really interested in me, or are we just playing? Or whatever he says is not really validate like taking it seriously, taking it as maybe he's just saying it to be polite, maybe he's just proposing the next date because he doesn't know what else to say, or like these kind of things is coming from basically me believing that he's too good to be true, I don't deserve, and therefore I start acting in ways that are weird. I start acting in ways that is not really the way I want to show up, actually. But then, because of those beliefs, I then show up differently than I would have ideally showed up, which is I think what he's saying, what he's interested in me because he's proposing the next date. I would love to go and explore. I know I'm very good at doing this, or I know what I'm doing. I know how to explore, right? How to get curious about his life. So instead of showing up that way, being interested in him and in the how the relationship is going, I would be so much circling in my own mind as to how I'm doing, what I'm not doing, why I'm doing this way. So anyway, do you know what I mean? I think many of us have experiences, right? So that's why then being aware of, it's coming from actually the belief that I have that I don't deserve it in whichever way, weirdly, then I will start acting in all kinds of chaotic ways. So this is one of the examples.
Yeah, that's a very good one, and and I'm happy to share more example. But because of the way it is wired, we often go, if we have like a strong belief that yes, it's going to influence how we show up, and then we're going to end up with the results that we thought about. Our belief are going to influence us, and it's going to influence what the outcome, the situation, in a way of a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's
Exactly.
really this. So this is why we talk always about awareness, because one little belief there can color, can taint your whole experience of it, and you can see the encounter through this filter, and you can really create what you don't want, but what you believe in the first place. So that was
Exactly.
a good example, because this is, if we give just a little bit of information, I think it's always interesting to see that the brain is wired to look for evidence to confirm what it believes in the first place. So it's not helping us, but this is the way it's like serving. It's like using less energy to go into the same, neural pathway over and over again. Like, yeah, you see, I told you so. I told you so. Handsome men are not into you. So we're going to look for those evidence much more than we're going to look for evidence of the opposite possibility, of the other, option. And
Exactly.
so this was a good example on belief. And I was thinking of maybe giving other example of how it shows up in patterns. So I think we talked about this already, but in terms of relationship, there is what we call, we have attachment style. So we have ways that we attach to other people. So in one side of the spectrum, we have what's called the anxious attachment, and the other side is more avoidant attachment. So it's not rigid. We all have some of those patterns, some of those features, but basically one is like when we are more anxious about, we want love, we want a relationship, we feel we want to be close to someone, but it comes with a lot of anxiety, a lot of idea about, oh, I'm maybe I'm not lovable as I am. So a lot of those beliefs in the background. And the avoidant attached person would be more like no assistance, and I'm going to have all sorts of strategy to put love, to keep love at bay. And I'm
Yeah.
mentioning those two because what's interesting is that those two types of personality, even though we all have a little bit of that, tend to attract each other. And they tend to attract each other and to confirm the belief that is not helping them in the first place. So I want to
Mm.
go a little bit into an example, and probably you might recognize yourself in one or the other example. So let's say the person who is more on the anxious attachment style is going to tend to want to attach very fast, like fall in love very fast, ignoring red flags, like not really paying attention if the person is really right for them or not, going super fast, super intense into the relationship. They're going to be a lot of like leaning in, lots of chasing energy. Maybe it's not really concrete, but there is this energy, at least in the mind, of thinking a lot about the person. Sometimes even obsessing about the person, like, oh, I'm so much into him, into her. I want, why is he not texting back? Why is she not texting back? So a lot of energy into the relationship. And with so much charge, so much thoughts about that other person, there's like a strong base for drama. And whenever the person is not reciprocating, it could go into spiraling, into creating more and more anxiety, and this can trigger a reaction. So the person could start texting a lot, or calling, or making a scene, or saying, oh, you see, you're not into me. Oh, you see, you didn't think about me this way. Like, oh, you see, like looking for evidence in the way that the person is not into them, because this is what they're thinking in the back of their minds. And as a result, yes, there's strong chances that this type of intense behavior, anxious behavior, if there's no awareness about this, that the person's going to run away. That the other person on the other side, if it's the opposite, it's more like, ooh, um, I think that my partners are very intense. I'm like not comfortable when people get very emotional. I'm not comfortable with conflict. I'm more, I'm feeling more confident, more safe in my own space. Like I'm also wanting to be in a relationship, but when there's too much intensity, it's frightened me because, maybe as a kid you were not comfortable with being close to someone, or we're not going to talk here about where it's coming from, but basically you have this discomfort about being close with someone. So if you find yourself with a partner that is needing you more, that has more emotion, or that expressing these emotions that you are not comfortable of expressing yourself or seeing in somebody else, you'll be like, oh yeah, oh no, relationship are too intense. I cannot do that, man. And so you can see, this is a bit of a caricature, but I'm sure you can, see yourself in one of those two description. And interestingly, those two types of people tend to attract each other and tend to confirm each other's belief. Like one is, I'm not lovable, of course unconscious, but oh, it's not never working. It's going to be more at the surface. Oh, it's never working. I always meet people who are not into me. There must be something like a problem. And then it creates more and more resistance. So then next time you show up with still lack of awareness about what was happening in the first place, in what you were thinking, and how you were acting, and how you were creating your situation. And on top of that, with more resistance that you gained from the last experience. And on the other side
Exactly.
is the same, yes.
So one of the things that I wanted to share here is that I had the same experience that you're talking about, and what I'm now seeing, like also the patterns of every relationship. At some point, you realize, and then you start looking at them, right? And then one of the things that I really noticed from my past experiences is this: that I was the having the pattern of either I was too much into I'm in love, I'm ready to do whatever and just, moving in or whatever the next thing's very fast and very intense and believing that this must be love and therefore I'm doing it, right? And then if it's not reciprocated, then me saying, "Oh my God, how can people not love what I'm offering? That must mean that I'm not lovable, or that must mean I'm not deserving," right? So this is like confirming again. And then going to the other extreme of I don't want to be in a relationship anymore. I don't want to be building a relationship. I just want to, have maybe fun, but then move on and to do other things, right? So, and then going back and then trying again and then being disappointed and going back. I think this is how most of my relationships have been, unfortunately. And I think what Pauline is really pointing is when or if I had been at the time aware of why I'm doing what I'm doing and and how I could take care of myself in those moments when I was doing it, then I wouldn't have gone through so many of these different ways of, approaching relationships, right? Different ways of being also disappointed from relationships, different ways of then telling myself, you see, things don't work anyway. Um, because what I think is true, basically, essentially, right? And therefore keep confirming whatever I believe at the time. I think also has this potential of then shutting down altogether and saying it's not meant for me. I meant to be this solo person or whatever the conclusions that I created for myself at the time, and therefore not letting anyone approach me or not letting any relationships be happening because I was internally closed in those moments, right? So whenever, even though maybe my brain is like, well, we need to get going and doing something or, starting to build relationships, but then the fear or the disappointment, the wounds are so stacked with each other that after a while you just want to protect yourself. You just want to be very, very gentle and careful, and therefore anything that comes up in the date that's not what I'm liking or that's triggering wounds, then I'm like, no, he's not me, my case, he's not my type, whatever, and then just moving on and out of the dating. So that's why what we really want for you to start contemplating whatever the pattern that you can see so far or whatever the behaviors you have seen so far of yourself. If you recognize yourself in any of these, then it's high time to get curious as to why you do what you do, basically, right? You can do that yourself or with a person you trust, a specialist, with a coach, and get curious as to if you haven't found the person that you're wanting, what might be standing in the way is the beliefs or the past experience that have been stacked in a way to confirm your biased belief of the world. So, Pauline, anything before we get into the specifics of how to change?
Yeah. Yeah, I think what you said is really true. Is this idea of stacking up, of going when you're going through those experiences without the awareness of what created those situations in the first place. Yes, you end up confirming those beliefs, then getting stronger and a strong and then also because of the emotion, and this is what I want to add is the emotional part because we're talking about opening your heart, doing something very vulnerable, putting yourself at risk. We're talking about something very that can impact you deeply. So when you get hurt, when you get like I'm not lovable, when you have this over and over, yes, as you mentioned, you end up building this armor. You're like and this resistance. And so yeah, it's the combination. If we start moving towards the solution, the the let's recap is awareness about what you think in the first place, how you show up based on what you think, and also the not knowing how to manage your emotion when that comes up, not knowing how to work with your mind, with your thoughts about when something has happened, what you're making of it as well. They're kind of like the thought that you
Yeah,
go into the situation, and then when it doesn't happen the way you want, what you make of it, when you have, if you
exactly.
kind of evaluate, this is our big coach speak, but if you look back on like why did this happen, like probably you don't really investigate, and if you do, it's more like you may add even more stories or beliefs that are not helping you, that are not good for you about yourself, about love, about men, about women, about whoever you are dating.
Yes, and the other thing I think we often do, unfortunately, is we judge ourselves heavily or we judge the other person heavily to say that because of that person, it didn't work. If that person was XYZ, then it would have. Or we judge ourselves for saying, like, why this happens to me all the time, right? Or I knew that this is how my life is, or whatever the very general but very heavy attachments we label it basically. I think what happens is,
Mm,
right, we put some kind of a label on ourselves to say, I'm not this type of person, or I'm not the person who does this, or I'm not the person who can go on date easily or lightly or whatever, freely, or right. And then we just create this category for ourselves, and then we just don't go out of that category, and then allow ourselves new opportunities, but not only of learning where it's coming from, but also once we know where it's coming from, then start looking at other ways to approach it, right? Looking at how else can I do this? If this is really stopping me from going for what I want, then how else could I show up? How else could I um, be the person that I want to be to create that person or to find that person? So that's why I really want everyone to uncovering that label, uncovering what's behind it, uncovering those conclusions that we may have had at some
Mhm.
point without really examining it and without really challenging, is that really the case? Like, is this really because of the other person that we didn't? Maybe it is, right? But we just need to be more conscious of not going to the obvious, usually the ways of like one or the other, and then extreme ways of black and white thinking that then makes us like, okay, I give up, or I could do only this far. I can't do many more, or I did my part and it didn't work, and then that's it, right? So that's what we want you to prevent. So uh, the solutions that we, I think, started talking about. So maybe, Pauline, we could really like get into if someone is now asking, okay, I have these patterns. I recognize some of this that you're talking about. I understand that something is not right. Where do I begin? Right? What would you
Okay.
say?
The first thing is to look at to start examining how you're showing up. I think looking at your actions, looking at how you're showing up in a relationship is the easiest, is the most obvious, is what I call is like the tip of the iceberg. So being curious about which type of people are you attracted to? Which type of people are you attracting in your life? What happens? Is there patterns in your relationship? Do you end the relationship? Do the other person end the relationship? How do you feel in the relationship? More looking at how do you feel negatively. Yeah, how do you deal with conflict? So looking at like what happens and see if there is a trend, if there is something happening over and over in your relationship, in dating and in relationships. So just being curious, putting the investigator hat on and looking like, okay, maybe for the last 5, 10, 20, I don't know how many years you've been dating and having relationship, like what was the common features in the relationship and in my partners. And just doing this exercise usually super enlightening because you're like, whoa, I didn't see this way. I actually felt the same way. Maybe the partner showed up differently, but I ended up feeling, jealous or rejected or triggered in a similar way over and over. So it's not the partner, it's you put yourself in a situation where this happened. And
Yeah.
from this, then moving on to observe, like not observing, but like uncovering your belief, like believe about myself, about being myself being lovable or not. Why not? Why do I believe about love? Why do I believe about intimacy, about being close to someone?
Mm,
Why do I believe, what do I believe about commitment? What do I believe about men if I'm into men, or about women if I'm into women? Just asking yourself this basic question that I don't think most of us ask ourselves, just taking the
yeah.
time. And then you can also be curious in what you received as a message, mostly from your parents or caretakers, to try to make sense of things, how are you, how do you experience love from your dad, from your mom, from your people who raised you? And so this starts to create like a picture, and I call this the blueprints, like the way you are seeing and acting in relationship. So already uncovering this is going to be like so big, like for you to see how you act and what you believe about love is going to make a lot of sense. Like you're going to see and you're going to understand a lot. So this is really, really the first step for me.
Amazing. And I would add to that is that the way that I recognize in my own, or used to recognize in my own patterns, is I think the extremes that always helps me understand that I'm not really being myself, or I'm not really acting in my best interest when I'm doing the extremes. For instance, if I'm really like from the first, I'm telling myself, oh, I'm in love and I can't be helped, right? Of course, I'm exaggerating, but some version of the
Mm-hmm.
exaggerations that I notice is really when the red flags start happening. Because, like Pauline was saying, that these are the states where I'm not really looking at, do I really like this person? Is this really person the best person that I'm looking for, right? Instead of doing that, I'm already in my own biased opinion of this is the person, I found him, and therefore I'm not interested in anything else, right? Even if my friends would say something, I would be like not liking them. So if I'm doing that, that means that I'm not really going in my own best interest of really finding the long-term partnership that I'm wanting. So that's why I look out for those extremes or exaggerations. In the other one that I would really get curious is this um, attachment or fear, whichever the way that feels in your body, is whatever the feelings are indicating, right? So, like for me, for instance, I would tell myself, oh my God, if this person does not go on a second date or third date, that means I can't find anyone anymore, right? Like some version of like the attachment without really realizing it, but like it feels like I have to have him or I have to be in this relationship, kind of this attachment or fear. This is, I also know that it's a red flag that I need to be looking at what's going on, because I really now have understood that I want relationships out of like genuine love and freedom without any attachments, right? Without like any unhealthy, oh my God, I can't live without you. You are the source of my happiness. And if you don't exist, I won't exist. This I think is no longer applicable in my at least relationship. So that's why I get curious then, why am I feeling so much attached? Why am I feeling so much fearful that if I don't build this relationship, then my life won't be the same or whatever, right? So that's why these might be other ways to look at what's going on, right? Why am I so attached, or why am I having this fear? Or why am I having some kind of scarcity that's telling me that I need to be looking at what I'm believing to be true about myself, about the other person, or about dating. So that's why these are the ways you would also notice it. Um, Anything else that we haven't mentioned in this solution section?
Well, I think the solution could be, we could talk about it for a long time, but already to start with this, like having awareness, because this is the first thing. When you have awareness, you have the ability to make different choices. You have the ability to behave in a different way, to pick different partner if this is an issue, to take care of yourself in the relationship and stay centered if you tend to lose yourself in the relationship. So without going too much into like there are other parts of the solution, but I think for today maybe just staying at like using dating against yourself is when you are not aware. Using dating for yourself is when you are aware, because when you're aware, then everything can start changing. It's just the beginning of the solution, let's say, but it's probably the most powerful thing you can do for yourself is having awareness of what's happening and how you are doing relationship. So you put yourself in a place of agency, in a place of power, in a place of like, oh, I'm not operating blindly driven by my fears or my resistance or the message I received from my parents about love. No, I got clarity. I know what I received. I know what was in the background. And I'm deciding to follow or not this model, or to create a new way that is serving me, that is taking me to partners that are good for me, that are taking me in ways that I'm not sabotaging the relationship. And so this can take time and more element to build this, but really let's stay there for today on the first stage of really understanding how you're working, how you're operating, and giving yourself the keys to do differently.
Exactly. And just to add to that is that every dating could be a new way of seeing yourself, new way of approaching this if the other one didn't work, or if the other one that you were not really satisfied, right? So that's why I love this idea of every day we get to practice something.
Yeah.
And sometimes it could be things that lead us to what we want, right? But sometimes, unfortunately, also not. So that's why being aware of what is it that is leading us to what we want and what is it that's not? And every day we get to experience in a new way of approaching that. So that's why if you think that whatever you've been doing up until now is not really what you wanted, then it's high time to approach this dating and in a new way, in a way that's really useful to you and not create this or reaffirm the pattern that you already know how to do well, because obviously that pattern is not really serving you, right? So that's why we would love to hear from you how it's going, how you're approaching it, and what's working and what's not working, and if you need help with. So, having said that, thank you so much, Pauline, as usual. It was
Thank you,
a
Estelle.
great topic. So, stay safe, and we see you next Tuesday.
Ciao, bye.
And